What do a speaking coach, a strategy consultant, and a sales and growth manager have in common? It sounds like the start of a bad joke, right? But honestly, it's all about finding out what people really do in their jobs. The stories, the struggles, the coffee breaks. The real stuff you won't get in a job title.
Welcome to a space where we sit down with people from all kinds of careers, have a laugh, and dive into what makes their work meaningful. Whether you're looking to learn something new or just here for a good story, let us be your guide. I'm Geoff.
And I'm Charlie.
And let's get Casually
Pro.
Hey.
Awesome. Well, today we have such an interesting guest. Ben Bartolone is a sales and growth manager, but he's done a whole lot of different things in both the sales and growth side, coming out of one of the most surprising areas, Broadway, of all places. Ben, thank you so much for joining us.
Of course. Thanks for having me on here. There is a saying in Broadway work that there's never a dull moment. And because there's always something. That applies a lot of places, but whenever there's a mention of working in Broadway, it's what comes to mind. Of Broadway of all places. And in my head, I thought, never a dull moment.
Well, awesome. So, Ben, can you start us off by telling us what you're doing now and why is it so cool?
Kind of you. So right now I'm working fractionally with two incredible companies. One is named Beta Acid. Beta Acid, as opposed to Alpha Acid, which is a beer brewing term. I'll get into that after this. And this is a design development agency that just does incredible work. We had a meeting a couple days ago with my head of engineering and the co-founder, and we talked about, what we do best is the boring stuff. There's nothing super exciting about a great website running well or a good AI tool helping out your backend go from having 8 hours of process needed a week to one, but it's what matters. So one of them is Beta Acid, and the other is a company called Covent, which is an incredibly young startup that is in pre-seed and going for seed right now, focused on helping event sponsors find event organizers. And coming from where I come from and running events all the time, every single person running events would love more sponsors. What I didn't expect in growth on this side is how many sponsors are really excited to find more events. And it's super fun. The founders were directors of marketing themselves and found this need, so they decided to make the platform. So I'm splitting my time between these two. And it's a lot of conversations on business development, meeting new folks, finding out what people's needs actually are, getting down to what keeps them up at night. And I don't mean that with hyperbole of actually like, what do you wake up at 3 a.m. and go, oh, shoot, I didn't do this. And helping alleviate those points, really. That's what I do.
Wow, that's incredible. So it seems like it's a lot of matchmaking on the back end. Who makes sense for what makes sense for this particular product or service or company. It sounds complicated. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah.
How do you kind of go about finding your ideal customer? Because I think that's where you really cut your teeth, right? In sales is figuring out who is best for my service and product. Where do you start?
Sure. And this is a great question for these two companies because one is a product. One is a dual-sided product, a dual-sided marketplace, event sponsors, event organizers, and one is a services company. We want to work with you to build the thing together that's going to get you where you need to go. So on the beta acid side, I didn't explain this. An alpha acid and a beta acid are the reactive agents in beer brewing, in hops. My older brother is part owner of a brewery in Chicago, and the owners of Beta Acid used to own a brewery in Seattle. So when we started talking, a lot of these companies these days have, like a slightly switched name, missing a vowel or some, silly play on words or something. That's always so they can get the domain, as I understand it, because it's available. I said, what's with the name? What's Beta Acid about? And they explained this, and I thought, I know about this. So when you're brewing beer, the alpha acids are the reactive agents in hops that give it the beer taste. the darkness, the boldness. It makes beer taste like beer. Beta acids are what come afterwards and brighten up what's already in existence. So if you're drinking an IPA and there's a bit of an orange tang to it, the beta acids will have that reaction through the type of hops. If there is a fruity factor, it'll give that springy, fruity taste in a goza or something like that. So a beta acid creates more of what already exists, and it brightens up what is already in place, and that's why they named the company that. To your question, on the services side, finding out who actually needs your services, it does take a bit of digging because you never know when a company needs a new website, or you never know when a company can have their internal processes improved upon with software. They are the ones that know that. If you need a new website, if your mobile app needs updating, the only team that knows that is your own. And no amount of prospecting on the part of a salesperson will create that. No matter how much you and I talk, you're never going to say, now that we're speaking so much, I am ready to spend on an expensive months-long project. That needs to come from internal sides. So for services, it's really about, I'm in the recency business. I don't know when you'll need it, but I want to be top of mind when you do. Or you might not need it, but whenever someone needs something special, whether it's the bathtub fixed or the tail light is out in your car, my first question to people when I have this happen to me is, hey, do you know anybody that does this? I just want to find somebody that you trust already so that I can trust them, as opposed to going out there, searching through, seeing who's out there, what the reviews say, and then worry about getting screwed over. So the easiest way people find a services company like Beta Acid is asking their friends, asking their coworkers, look, hey, we need some website updates and we're trying to integrate this piece of AI that just isn't clicking. Do you know anybody that does this? And my job is to make sure when you are asked that, you think of me. Simple as that. So recency, getting those conversations going, making sure they're always maybe not top of mind, but somewhere near the front. So with Covent on the product side, which is a dual-sided marketplace, we're helping event sponsors with a need that is ongoing. Event sponsors are always looking for events to sponsor, simple as that. And on the other side of it, events being put up, sometimes the entire point of an event being created, organized, run, is to get sponsors, is to run that as the business. And generally, we're linking those two people together, and those pain points are ongoing. It's always, I know there are events out there, but how do I sort through them? How do I A/B test this? And how much time and how many months does it take until we realize this was the right one, this was the wrong one? We do all that for you. So it's an ongoing need when you're working with a product. And my ideal customer is easier to find that way. Getting them on platform is pretty easy, but then, like anything, you have to prove it. You have to do it over time. And that's where customer success comes in. That's where, our account managers come in. And it's one thing to say you can do something. It's another entirely to live by your word, I suppose. So those two things are very different. And it's fun for me because I get to kind of switch the hats I'm wearing, turn one around, turn it this way. And working in services for a while, it's fun to work on a product. Working on a product, it's fun to think creatively for a service, and they serve each other.
Wow, indeed, it seems like two very different things, which can be great because you don't spend all your time to do one thing. But at the same time, how do you manage your time between those two companies? Do you split
Sure.
days? Do you split weeks? What's your strategy?
Yeah, I split days. I am an absolute evangelist for time blocking and being very honest, to kind of similar to, you have to follow through and do what you say you're going to do. If I set my calendar from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m., I'm doing something. And from 1 p.m. to 3 p.m., I'm doing something. I have to do it. I have to be honest to my own plans. So time blocking, you'll see people talk about the importance of time blocking. The underlying issue there is it's easy to look at your calendar and ignore it. if you are only responsible for yourself, for what you're doing. If you're not in an office, I'm working remotely. It's one thing to plan it, but then you have to time block and respect your time blocks. Now, granted, that's also helpful because you have an end time. Also, you're not doing this ongoing. If it's 1 p.m. to 3 p.m., at 3, you stop, go grab coffee, look at the sun, something else. So having that limited time creates a bit of, we can call it urgency for myself, because these are the 2 hours I'm getting this done. This is the 4 hours I'm getting this done. But yeah, it's within each day because both teams are ongoing. There are some folks that are full-time on both of them, and they're always, either waiting for answers from me or I want to get them something. So given that those are fractional, neither of them is full-time. I set, one is here on the calendar, one is here. Next day, same thing. And there are moments I'll say, like, I'm going to do this in the afternoon because in the morning I have this, or I'm recording a podcast. So from, this time to this time, I'm not free. And just making sure that's clear ahead of time, given, everybody knows how fractional work is. It's not this time to this time every day you're doing this. I'm setting it for myself. Hope that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I
Cool.
am also a fellow evangelist of blocking out time, but even more importantly, creating boundaries, right? I think one
Yes.
of the biggest parts of workplace burnout in general is not knowing when to stop.
Mhm.
I came from an industry where I was working at my highest 120 hours a week, which the look on your face, if you couldn't tell, it's
Yeah.
the same look that I get from most people who weren't in my industry. And then once I left, I figured out that, wow, I really enjoy seeing the sun. I should do this more often.
Mhm.
And so I made a rule for myself, and I'll tell this to everyone who is obviously listening right now, but anyone who contacts me in general, is I don't take calls or emails on weekends, holidays, or anytime after 6 p.m. If it's that urgent that you need my help in an emergency setting, there's 911. I promise you they'll pick up.
Yeah.
But more realistically, there are very, very few things that fall apart in the middle of the night and that
Mhm.
can't be fixed at 7, 8, 9 a.m. the next day.
That's right.
I think it's really important, especially for people who work maybe not so long or haven't been so long in their careers, to understand that taking care of yourself is just as important as taking care of the job. And I guess with that being said, right, sales is a tough environment to come up in. There are a lot of late calls, late dinners, uh, tough clients, even tougher managers. Could you tell us about how you managed to kind of build these senses of uh, boundaries while coming up
Mhm.
in sales?
Sure. And when they're challenged as well, because, you can set them for yourself, you can let everybody know. Um, if you set a boundary for 6 p.m. onwards, nobody contacts me. The first time that happens from someone, it's never at 6. It's like 6:05, and then it's 6:14. Not the same day, but it's people maybe even subconsciously realizing they can reach you and realizing they can reach you. And I will always give people the benefit of the doubt. I never think it's, oh, I'm going to purposely do this. But that eventually leads to those 11 p.m. texts of checking in on something as you're like looking at something in bed and being like, I'm not, what? Why are you texting me? Why are you slacking me right now? And maintaining those healthy boundaries. And I think this is something that our generation is really figuring out well, is healthy boundaries. We as an American culture and have been taught for a long time that we live to work. And my question to myself and others is always, for what? If the answer is not for ourselves, our friends, our family, our loved ones, our community, our life, then it's for something else outside of that. And it's helpful to rethink why you might be working so much. Because if you are not, or your family, or your friends, or your community are not reaping the benefits of all your hard work, and it's going to someone or something that might not appreciate it as much, life is short, man. Why work so much? I was doing the 120 hours a week math is what my face was. I was like, divided by seven, divided by five, divided by six, and that was the question of like, where does that go? I lived a similar life. Mine was generally around 80 or so. So I you know, joke, not jokingly, won't complain. But my former career in producing Broadway shows was, well, you have a 10 to 6 office and you often see shows. Around the shows, there's dinners. And sometimes you're seeing it with work people. Other times it's the boss's bosses in town. Other times friends are visiting, and they want to go see Lion King or Wicked or something. And of course, yeah, I'd love to go. But because of that, you were on from, and it was never just 10 a.m. I was waking up to, and, like answering things by 8:30 to 11 p.m. after the show. And if you're in a show for 2.5, 3 hours, you check your phone, you have messages as one does when you're in something for a few hours. And all of this to say, I'm glad you got to see the sun because why else are we doing this? And I don't mean be selfish, only for this or transactionally only for this, but I'm a firm believer in everything in moderation. And there really is a point where not only can you burn yourself out or, the work might not be as productive as you'd like it to be, but to what end is always my question for myself of why work so much consistently if the results are staying the same. You might change your life. You might lift someone out of, a worse environment. You might lift yourself into something you've always wanted, and that's amazing. But to what end, and are you getting to enjoy the life you're creating for yourself is always my question.
Wow, that's an amazing thing to ask yourself. I can completely relate on what a lack of boundaries can do on one's mental health. I used to be a freelance software engineer, and it slipped easily into working in the night, sometimes in the middle of the night. Like I felt it was urgent, so I would stay up until 4 or 5 a.m. to finish it. It was probably not needed, and my life suffered a lot until I decided, like you, to put a hard boundary, like to really say between this and this, I'm working. And every once in a while, it happened that I didn't really feel like it. I wanted to do something else, but then I committed. You can not work at that time, but it's forbidden to work at any other times. So if you don't do the stuff in the time that is allotted, you have to bear the consequences. And it worked quite well, actually.
That's great. It's Imagine we didn't have phones in our pockets and we didn't have laptops and prior generations went to an office, did work without computers. I'm sure some people took it home. We've seen Mad Men. We know people take work home, but you couldn't take so much home with you then. And I love your point, Geoff, because if you can't get it done in that time, that's on you. Talking to yourself. It's a challenge for yourself, which is fun. And it creates a sense of urgency to be like, well, now's the time I do it. So I have to do it now. It's really interesting you say that because literally right before we are recording this, an old coworker of mine and I, who were talking over social media, we send each other silly reels all the time. He had just left our old company, which was very toxic. I had gotten out a few years ago. They paid him really well and he stuck around for a while. He recently got a new position, super happy for him. He is worlds happier. And he just literally wrote to me to say, guess who reached out and said, everything is a mess there and can I help them? And, of course, part of me wants to laugh and be like, oh no, sounds like a them problem. But, he was asking me because I was like, okay, he's asking me for a reason. What is that reason? And I said, Do you want to tell them to leave you alone? Do you want to tell them what do you need and what is the ask? Do you want to tell them, here is the rate you will have to pay me if I'm coming back? Because they did not treat him well at all. And, surprise, surprise, a very important person leaves and then they realize, or maybe, overestimate themselves that things are on fire. But to your point, I said to him, is are you busy? Is your new job taking up all your time? The answer was yes. And I said, what do you want to do? It's one thing to turn down work, and I have a hard time turning down any paying work. This comes from theater life too, of, we're taught never to say no, always say yes to opportunities every single time. But to your point of saying no to time, and also, maybe rushing something to get it done before it was even needed, to your point, Geoff, I've done this too. It's also a matter of, I don't have to do this, in a very healthy way of, I don't have to, just because they asked, I don't have to do this right away. And setting healthy boundaries and timelines and everything. And then you get to respect those as much as they do. We have deviated so far from the sales thing. I'm so happy to keep saying these things, but I also want to respect the topic of getting into sales this way. And this ties really well because we've all heard bad horror stories. I guess horror stories are bad. Horror stories about salespeople being pressured and sounding like a David Mamet play and theater background. Let's call it a David Mamet movie. And coffee is for closers type of thing where you have to pound the phones and do these things. And yes, that can exist. That is not what I've done. I think the best comparison as to why I got into and stay in sales is I like it. A few years ago, I read Lewis Black's autobiography, and it's everything up to him starting stand-up comedy. Everything before it is what the book is about. And it ends with him getting on stage for the first time doing stand-up, and he says, and no matter how far of a hole I was digging myself further into the ground by bombing on stage, by doing terribly on stage, I wanted to keep going. And there's something that stuck with me in that book of no matter how hard it can be, and I hope you both and anyone listening to this finds that thing that no matter how challenging it is, and goodness, this is challenging, I hope you find the thing that allows you to keep wanting to keep going in this respect. So sales is tricky, man. It's tricky because at any given day, not everybody understands it. Some people think it's like pulling a rabbit out of a hat. More often than not, it's, well, why don't you just go find leads? Why don't you just find people? And in theater, my theater life, the joke was that people would say to you, well, why don't you just be on Broadway? If you were just on Broadway, that would be great, right? As though nobody thought of that. As though, oh, that's the problem. I need more leads. Why didn't I think of that? It's an ongoing challenge. It's fun though. I enjoy it. I find it fulfilling. I think it's a very simple answer told in a very long way, but I do it because I love it. Simple as that.
I have not found a single person yet that has found their why and not been successful or happy or both, right? For
Yeah.
me, success and happiness are both questions of attrition. Can you survive long enough doing what you do to make it a career, to make it a valuable proposition? 9 out of 10 times, it's just how long you're in it. And you can stay much, much longer in any circumstance if you like it, if you enjoy it. And so I really, really appreciate that answer. And I kind of want to go back a little because there is a why inside of the why, right? You're talking about how much uh, you had an interesting time in Broadway and then switching over to sales. But in my head and in a lot of other people's heads, you're not the conventional salesman. That is to say, you don't push a product or a service on someone. Talking with you about whatever you're working on never ends up, I don't feel pressured to, okay, I guess I'll check the beta acid website. I guess I'll, I never feel pressured. I feel more intrigued than anything. And if I don't feel anything, at the very least, I had a friendly conversation with someone. So can you walk us through your approach when it comes to sales?
Yeah, absolutely. And I have a long running joke with myself mostly that I'm a terrible salesperson, mostly because people expect you to try and sell them a used car. And I often, gosh, it's, can't remember where I heard this, but recently I heard somebody explain sales as collaboration, listening, and empathy. And nothing spoke more true to me in this work than those terms, because the minute you have to sell something, say you're convincing me to buy something and you're doing a great job, and it can be a bit of a song and dance of really like putting on a show for somebody, and then you sell it, and the minute you're gone and they're alone with their thoughts of the thing you sold them, if that song and dance isn't keeping the shine on the product and they're realizing it's nothing they want, then it wasn't a good sale because they didn't actually need anything. So selling to me is, hey, does this help you? If not, even better. I'm glad you don't need it. I often am, I'm in business because people need this for X, Y reasons, but I hope you don't need this because your life will be easier knowing you probably will eventually. Imagine you're like, let's compare me to a glorious profession. Imagine you're a plumber. Nobody wants to need a plumber. And I'm not selling a plumbing solution or anything like that, but it's the kind of thing that everyone knows you need every so often because things need to be fixed. Pipes break, pipes burst, things happen, like there needs to be a reason to get things back in working order. And a good solution in that case should be invisible. I don't think about the fact that my apartment has good plumbing or the shower head works well. It's just part of life. It's invisible. To me, a good salesperson is trying to get you back to that point. You don't have to think about the issue. And that's what I think when I talk about I cure headaches. We talk about pain points in sales a lot and removing those. Something that's a pain point that is removed, you don't think about, you shouldn't think about. Imagine, you have a cold for 2 weeks and you can't breathe through your nose. And for those 2 weeks, all I do is think of all the times in my life that I took advantage of having a nose I could breathe through. And I tell myself that I will never take this for granted again. And I'm only thinking about breathing through my nose right now because I'm talking about it. Otherwise, I wasn't thinking about it all day or yesterday. It should be a cure, should get you back to the point you don't have to think about these things. And gosh, I mean, that's sales to me. Let's just solve the problem and hopefully let you move on with your life. In terms of being the typical salesperson, to be totally honest, I don't know any in technology that act the way that you and I find bad salespeople to act in our minds. I've met them. I've never met them in tech. I've met them looking at leasing a car, but I've met great people, looking at leasing a car. I've met people trying to buy something like a cell phone accessory or something. Yeah, I've like buying a bed, years ago, like a mattress store. But at the same time, there are nice people there too. I've never met anybody in technology that is shady, and maybe I just haven't met them yet. They must exist, right? But it becomes like a textbook lesson after a while. And I've never met a walking and talking shady salesperson. They must exist. Let's say they do.
It's so easy to kind of like paint people in certain professions as villains. Um,
Yeah.
Sales in particular, I feel gets a like ginormously bad rap
Yeah.
when it comes to how they're portrayed media wise or otherwise. But it's an essential function of business. I mean, a lot of people don't think about it because they think, oh, well, you just have a
Mhm.
really good product and it sells itself, right? But that's not the case. I mean, we live in a modernized world where every product has at least one, two, three, if not a million competitors, all trying to get the same thing. And you might prefer one product over the other, but if you don't know it exists, then that's the problem, right? And salespeople
Right.
alleviate that. inform you. They give you all the tools you need necessary to make the decision yourself. Now, are there shady people that lie about their product, that lie about their service? Yeah, of course. I mean, there's shady people in every profession, but I think the really, truly impressive sales professionals leave you in a better position, whether you need the product, the service, or not after the conversation, right? Because either they inform you about this entire range of stuff that they have access to that you're like, oh, I actually do need that. And then you make the sale, or you hear about the things that they have to offer and the information behind them, and you realize, okay, that's not the position I'm in. And so you start thinking more critically about what you need and what you don't need. So I'm all for that as well. Um, Moving back here a little bit, what made you want to make that massive transition? Because to me, in my head, I'm thinking Broadway, the glitz, the glam, I mean, even the not so glamorous parts seem fun. To something like tech sales. Help me make that connection there.
Yeah. I bet you'll identify with a lot of the early steps of it was just 80 hours a week, 7 days a week, usually too. Nearly all of my weekends. And it wasn't even, I was asked, I was told Saturday is our schedule here, Sunday is our schedule here. I was like, oh, funny. I was going to do things with my wife. Okay. Um, I was hitting 39 and I don't find 30, 40 yet ages to be specific in terms of an actual life change time, but they're helpful for reflection moments the way that New Year's is another day, but we collectively decide it's a cool day to celebrate something and to acknowledge something. So I was approaching 40. Yeah, I was 39 and I had been doing this a very, very long time. I I was financially stuck. I wasn't getting paid terribly well. I was making what an entry level tech salesperson makes while my title was producer of what are the legal term is first class productions, Broadway shows, national tours, some major stand up shows. I'm using technical terms. A show that comes in, you help it set up for about 3 weeks, audience comes, that kind of thing. I was making entry level, what we consider money. So I was getting to a point that I was seeing a lot of my other friends in other fields buy a house, live their lives, pay off their student loans. And I was still not struggling. Like I was paying my bills, but I was at a point I felt a little stunted. Couple that with I was ready for a change myself in schedule. I did not get to see my wife, my friends, my family much. I wouldn't be able to do this. This hour and a half of spending time with you guys would be incredibly difficult to carve out because my phone would have rung 3 times by now. And it wasn't a I'm off the clock because there is no clock to be off of. It was something's on fire. Remember, never a dull moment. And I was ready for a shift in having boundaries, having a job that was on average 40 hours a week. And I didn't know what that was. So I went to one of my wife's best friends was getting married in 2019. Went to her wedding weekend, and one of our mutual friends was there. And I was kind of beside myself. I thought I was so hyper trained in one thing. I thought I could only work the fry counter at a fast food restaurant. That's all I knew how to do. I did it really well on the big time, but that's it. And I was commiserating with him. He works at MongoDB. He's a software engineer, and we were having he has really nice wine. The joke was always he has good money, so he brings good wine to places. And I was like, that's great. I want to do that. We were having nice wine, and he said, have you never considered tech? And what came out of my mouth had more F bombs in it. But what I basically said was an emphatic from my soul, what would I do in technology? Like that felt like an absurd question. That's like saying, have you ever tried walking on stilts and then running? I think you'd be great at that. And it's what would I be doing on stilts? So he helped me break it down. And the short version of this is what I tell a lot of people who are transitioning careers. Think about what you know really well from the job you know really well and take the skill set underneath that. This honestly changed my life. I was good at this, and underneath that, I was good at starting conversations. I had a lot of experience doing this, and what that means is I am type A with budgets and sheets and CRM data now as the end result. And so we kind of walked through ideas of what I could do. Said I could be a project manager, which is like stage management, and I've done stage management. I could take some years and learn how to be a software developer. I said that sounds amazing. I'll do anything else right now. And I realized that was years of work. I thought I need something now. What can I do now? So I leaned into, and he said, and you could be in sales. And I had the answer everybody has. I was like, I'm not going to do that. I'm not a sales guy. What does that mean? We all have this reaction, and we see it in others the first time they hear it, of like, oh, cool, okay. So I decided I was going to follow project management. I was like, that'll be my way in. I'm not sure what in technology, but it seems like every person I talk to in tech has cool things going on. They have lives outside of work, and they're stable. So I interviewed for a couple project management spots. I went to one agency. It was 2019. I went in person to my first interview wearing a suit to an agency in Soho here in New York, and talked about project management. And the agency owner was really cool. And he was like, I think you would rock this if you want it. Um, do you want to talk to our sales manager also? Because we have an opening in that side of things too. And I said, as I've learned to do in life, yeah, that doesn't hurt. Worst thing is I get more information. So in the most tech way, we went and got oat milk lattes at the nearby cafe. And he's like, so we're looking for an entry level person. And I know you're talking to them about the project management side. I don't want to influence your decision. I just want to let you know what this job is about. And he described what I did producing Broadway shows. It was like bring people in, have conversations, tell them a little bit about the budget, what it could be. We'll work out a plan together, see who else we need to get involved, what that means about which particular people get involved. It's a different project with this person as opposed to this person. And to me, that's, you bring in this composer, it's a different show than this composer or the lyricist or the book writer. And everything he described, I I had this wash of relief go over me because I know exactly how to do this. This is what I've been doing already. And it was so helpful to understand that what I knew how to do was so transferable to a field I didn't even know had it. So that's how I got into tech sales. I took that job. I stayed. I was there 2 years and change. Yeah, I learned the bones are the same. I learned the details. I can talk about business development, selling, and get people interested. Talking about technical details, I learned. It was a little uphill thing, but I'd say 5, 6 months. I was pretty comfortable talking about these details, and here we are. So that's kind of what brought me here.
Sounds like you got sold to by a sales guy.
I really did. Yeah, he's like, here, get a nice latte. And I was like, pick it up what you're putting down here. I had to recognize the pattern, but there's a lot to be said in to that point, actually. Even though someone knows you're putting on the good presentation for them, that can be a moment of appreciation as opposed to I'm being sold to. Because, say I go to dinner with my wife and I like, hold the door open for her. It's not like a transactional thing. I'm doing it to be a good partner. But to your point of what you mentioned about being sold to a little bit, there are moments that it's nice to recognize that of like game recognized game of this is a nice touch, well done. It's sometimes it's helpful to acknowledge like, oh, that was a classy touch. Thank you for doing that. Even if they're doing it to present to you, that's okay. It's a wonderful thing because it's not presenting to you for something in return. It's just every one of us has ideas in life that we think others might enjoy, and we present it. A weekend trip with friends, a fantasy football league. Hey, what if we did this together? Wouldn't it be cool if we started a business, we started a podcast, and you present it to each other? There is nothing wrong with doing that well. And my now former boss from that first tech company, that agency I worked with, I knew he was doing that. And it was like well played, well done. Thank you for this. This is really kind because it's giving. And as long as it's giving and not meant to be taking, that's good sales, you know?
Wow, that's an amazing story, Ben. And I really love how you an initial, oh no, not this, can turn into something that you like. Because I can relate a lot thinking about something and oh no. But every once in a while, you just try to know more, you see what it is, and realize that you like it. I think this is a very inspiring story in this way. The way you talk about this sales job looks perfect, and we like to give the good and the bad. Otherwise it
Oh,
seems
absolutely.
it seems too good. Can you tell us a little bit about some challenges or difficulties that you can find in a sales job?
Yeah. And I'll start with so much of it can be out of your control. I don't know if I would have gotten my first sales job in 2 months now when I did in 2019. I don't know. Maybe I would. Yeah, I genuinely don't know. But the market was different. The, online remote work has changed everything. So I don't know if I would have gotten that role now. I like to think I would, but I also don't want to take credit for that. There are certain things out of my control. And leading into there, so much of sales, I mean, you can't convince somebody to buy. You can't. Like we were saying earlier, if you eventually do a song and dance and convince somebody to give you $50 for something, once that song and dance is gone and they're alone, they're going to look at that thing and go, I didn't want this. I'm going to bring it back. Here's the receipt, essentially. And I've seen this happen in sales where someone will be brought across the finish line and sign on the dotted line, and then they get handed over to begin the project with customer success. And they quickly realize, oh, we don't really need this. No, thank you. We're good. Thank you so much. We'll pay you for the 3 weeks as opposed to the 6 months. So a lot of it is out of your control, and it never will be in your control. And that leads to a hard target. So you can strike out constantly. Coming from theater, I was an actor before I was a producer. You are accustomed from day one to being told you go and just do as many auditions as you can, and you will not hear from the overwhelming majority of them. And that helped me over time because you deal with rejection over and over, or worse than rejection, you deal with nothing in return, just silence, which I now tell people. Charles, I mentioned to somebody on a tech walk this morning, I now say the worst thing that can happen is they don't respond at all. That's okay. That's not too bad, is it? It's just, all right, next. And so the hard part is the overwhelming work that you just have to expect, the majority of which is going to be giving you nothing back in terms of responses, positive, negative, whatever, trying out how to reach people. Sometimes you just feel like you're never going to get a response from somebody, and then that happens. And then somebody responds and it's a good fit. But the important thing is, and there are many ways to use this metaphor in life outside of work, outside of tech sales, is you just have to try. And whenever you say that, the underlying statement is because it's just hard enough that don't worry about what if I can't, what if I won't, what if they don't. You just have to try it. I grew accustomed from a young age to putting myself out there in public, on a stage with lights on me and potentially, forgetting lines or something silly or something like that. But the risk is worth the reward in this respect. Now, the risk, because there's a lot about the reward on LinkedIn, a lot about the ice baths, a lot about crushing cold calls and things like that. Cold calls are awful. I don't know anyone from the bottom of my heart who can really, at the end of the day, say, yes, I want to call strangers and have them be a little bit terse with me. I convince myself I enjoy it because I fall in love with the process. Like I fell in love with the process of getting to auditions and giving a monologue and hearing nothing back. But if you told somebody you never have to do this again and your life won't change because you don't have to, I don't know a single person that would do that. It's hard to get the outreach going. You're putting yourself out there. You're putting yourself out there on a stage where you can stumble. You feel like someone is judging you. You feel like you are screwing up in public. And To zoom that out a bit, salespeople often have quotas or goals, hard numbers to be reached. Talk about having your performance on a wide scale that is literally sitting in a piece of software for your bosses to see. It's hard. It's nerve-wracking. It's a very vulnerable place to be. And maybe one of the reasons I might not sound like a lot of salespeople is I come from that place of vulnerability because I studied emotion for years of my life growing up in theater, and that was my job. Was emotions. And the other way to go about being vulnerable is to be guarded. So, we might meet some people that put up a front, put up a tough guy attitude, and maybe I'm leaning into now what could become the bad sales guy stereotype of a little too tough about it, a little too, bullheaded and guarded because it's vulnerable. So the bad side is you can start to develop this shell after a while and feel like you're being attacked, when in reality, you're being asked to do a hard thing and you've agreed to do a hard thing. So it is okay to embrace, what do people, embrace the suck. It's really hard. And there's no way around that fact. Everything on LinkedIn is about making that difficult thing a little bit easier. So I hope that answers the question. Can I elaborate on any part of that for any direction you want to take it?
Oh yeah. So now we have a more balanced view on the job, and it seems that it's there's also some difficulties here. I did some cold call recently for the first time, and yeah, I have to say it was really hard. Especially what was hard was the fact that there were only around 10% of the calls that
Yeah.
reached someone. So you keep dialing and dialing and dialing until you have someone who don't listen to you. And it can be really, really hard. But the question I would like to ask you is, since you have a past in acting, do
Mhm.
you think that gives you an edge in sales, in talking, maybe even in calls or in job interviews?
Probably. I would say no, and I think that's wrong. I studied voice for years. I studied speech, pronunciation. Like 19th century, it was called elocution. I studied where sounds go in particular parts of your mask, of the fact I know it's called a mask, like your eyes, your nose, your mouth, where your sinuses are. I'm sure it does. I have a lot of practice and study in presenting, both in public and places like this. I'm positive it does. I speak clearly. That's work that can be put in. I spoke with a friend this morning, actually, a founder who's a couple decades older than me, who asked, "Can I help him give better presentations?" And I thought it was a really kind thing because it was very vulnerable for someone decades older than me to ask first and foremost and not assume he has all the answers. But this is a silly comparison. Do you guys know the YouTube show Hot Ones, where people are eating the spicier and spicier wings?
Oh yeah.
So I sent him that. I sent him Sterling K. Brown on Hot Ones because he performs a sonnet, a Shakespearean sonnet, after one of the wings because he's lucid. The reason I brought that up is that's the kind of place of just the vulnerable, not media training, presenting honestly place where people on that show get beside themselves with the endorphins rushing and the heat sweating their system that some people get hilariously silly. Some people get mad. Some people just get lucid. They lose that professional front that a lot of people in Hollywood have to have. And I sent him Sterling K. Brown because he performs this sonnet. And to be perfectly honest, it is one of the most gorgeous sonnet performances I've ever seen. I'll send it to you guys after this.
Oh, yeah.
I mentioned that because it's honest, it's real, and I've had practice. So I would say I don't think I do, and I think I am wrong in thinking that. I think we as individuals often underestimate what our own experiences have brought to this point. And, I've had film training, I've had stage training, I've had scene study, I've had this thing, active listening. I heard this for the first time a few years ago. Someone said this to me in an interview. They gave me a very kind compliment about my active listening, and I had to look it up. I didn't know what it meant. And it was being quiet, taking in what you say, understanding what you say, processing that, responding. That is scene study. That is an acting lesson. Yeah, a person to person scene. If the three of us were in a scene from a piece of, a piece by Shakespeare, by Mamet, by Williams, by anyone, that's what that is. And that practice, this is one of those things I didn't realize I was built for tech sales, has been really helpful in this process because I'm not just waiting for you to stop talking and respond. I don't have it in my head already. I don't know what I'm going to say. And that's what makes it honest, In short, probably. I'm talking a lot.
No, no, that's why we have you here.
Fair.
Uh,
That's fair.
but listen, there's something really interesting, and it's a really, to me, as someone who is an avid kind of enthusiast about communication, noticing the paradigm shift that corporate America is slowly making. We're slowly trudging through it, but towards developing professions that are highly attuned to like emotional intelligence. And part of that is authenticity, right? I think when you're trying to communicate anything, and Geoff and I actually covered this on a different podcast with a wonderful person who teaches people how to sell. But when you're talking about any kind of outbound communication, the first thing that will turn anyone off to whatever you're saying, it doesn't matter if it's the number one answer to what they need in life, the first thing that turns them off is if they can tell that you're acting, that you're pretending to be something that you're not, right? Um, I know whenever I'm talking to someone and I'm networking and they're talking all about, oh yeah, I've done XYZ, I've been in doing whatever these things are, and they are bragging about things that I know, as a matter of fact, are just horrible positions to be in, whether they sound impressive or not, but they're talking about it like it is, a weekend trip to the Four Seasons. Like it shows me that you haven't actually done that. I immediately say, okay, yeah, that's great. And then I spend my time talking to someone else who's more attuned to what I actually think is what they're doing. And Geoff talks all the time about how if you go up on stage and you pretend like you're the best speaker on earth, 9 out of 10 times you're gonna have people snoring in the audience because you're not, and the audience knows you're not. So lean into something that is more authentic as to what you are, right? But I guess that's a long-winded way of saying we really value authenticity now. The
Mhm.
mask doesn't make sense anymore. And have you, I guess, in kind of discovering this sense of, okay, yes, I can act. I mean, you're a trained actor.
Yeah,
I can
sure.
put on that face. How do you reconcile years and years of training of doing that to,
Mhm.
hey, listen, I know you're probably not going to want this thing, but can I just tell you about it anyways? And you can make the decision. How do you
It's a,
reconcile those two ways of being?
it's a great question. And what came to my mind first after thinking about it for half a tick was um, acting isn't faking. It's a weird concept to say out loud, but it has to come from somewhere within you. And I turning this into a theater podcast, but the true experience of being on stage and being in a moment is not about faking a moment, but getting yourself to well up it to something inside of you. Imagine playing a villain. Actually, this is a really common conversation amongst theater kids, and by kids I mean all of us. Imagine playing a villain. How do you play someone who is actively causing harm to others in an authentic way? And you will see plenty of people in Hollywood. I say Hollywood because those are the most public facing people that have done this. but it's messed some people up. That's messed me up a bit. I've played villains. I have I joke I've played a lot of office douchebags and bad boyfriends is usually like my archetype on stage. And I take a lot of pride in being like, I'm not going to be those things. Um, but to play something you are not, you have to find the truth within you that you understand where they're coming from. And when you're playing a villain on stage, you have to find something that you identify with about that person. Through that identification, you will find your way into how they might feel otherwise. If you can understand that they're interested in power, okay, if you're interested in power in this position, you're interested in changing the course of this relationship for your own power, then maybe you can think about what it might feel like to feel this way. And I'm saying all of this because you can never fake a sales conversation. It has to be true to you. And if it's not true to you, you don't sell that thing. I cannot sell pharmaceuticals, and I have zero interest in selling pharmaceuticals, less than zero, because I will never be in a position where I would feel comfortable or confident talking about those things in a way that I would want others to have them because I'm not a doctor and I don't want to sell to doctors. It's just not my field. I don't want to sell tobacco. I don't, and I'm using particular instances. Those are the first ones that come to mind. I also don't want to sell mattresses or couches. Nothing wrong with that. Some people might really love Herman Miller designs or the mid-century feel of things. And as I'm saying that, I'm finding the ways that as a performer, I would get into a place of taking on that persona, but I'm never going to be that guy. And so the difference between performing in a role on stage or in film and selling something in that case is, to your point of authenticity, you've got to mean it. It really has to come from something underneath that I know, Charles, you and I both know the same people, and I'm sure you do too, Geoff, where you know the thing the person sells for a living, they just don't care enough about. And they should be selling something different or doing something different. There's nothing wrong with that. But the minute that authenticity is even a big question mark, the question marks pop up everywhere of, well, if it's not this, then am I doing this? Should I be doing this? Why are they doing this? As opposed to, look, I believe in this work. The reason I'm talking to you about this, because I'm excited about these things. And working with Beta Acid, there's some cool AI projects going on, and I'm an AI fanboy. I don't write AI programs, but I love learning about them. And it's cool because it's this and not this. And if this is of interest to you, I can tell you more. But if you don't need it, that's awesome. You really have to mean it. And if someone asks you to explain, gosh, be ready to sit down for an hour and talk about it. It's not like you have to find your life's passion in this work because at the end of the day, work is work. But find those places you can be authentic in sales. And that's the similarity between playing a role in theater or film. And this is you have to find what we call the seed of truth in that character or that role. And if you can find that and you find the excitement for yourself, it's infectious. We've all seen, you know, how many people do you ask if they've seen The Dark Knight and Heath Ledger play the Joker? Gosh, that guy was good in that role. And talk about, that he really put up with some demons himself playing that role, but he's not the Joker. He literally took off the makeup, but he found things about that role that he could identify with and lean into and were exciting to him in certain ways. And on the other side of that, selling something, you have to give a shit. You really just have to care. And if it's not authentic, like you said, if there's a moment of that question mark or doubting that people actually would buy the thing you're selling them, it's over, man. Those cold calls, you really have to care. I want to hear about your cold calls, Geoff. How did you get in this situation that you had to do this? Are you okay? Is there anything I can help with? Do you want to practice? I have something after that, but I would love to hear from you, Geoff, about like what brought you to making cold calls.
Well, yeah. So first, I used to be very shy a few years ago. Now I'm a public speaking coach, so I did everything that I was scared to do. Cold calling was the last thing that was in my mind that I was scared to do and that I never did. So
Good for
I thought
you.
about giving it a shot. It was very hard. Though on the second day, I have to admit, there was one moment where I kind of liked it. I don't know what
Nice.
happened. It's the only time I liked it.
I understand. It's Lewis Black talking about stand-up comedy of, no matter how much he was failing on stage, he just wanted to keep going. And because every so often somebody would laugh and he'd go, that person got it. And that moment is worth the work. So good for you. You're putting yourself out there and trying things that scare you. Good for you. That's impressive.
It didn't work yet. I have to say, those cold calls didn't work yet.
Sure.
I didn't
But you
really have a
tried.
plan, and you face objections, and you realize that most of the people they don't really want to talk, or that you didn't find the right way
Sure.
to make them talk. So yeah, I guess that there is a lot of discovery when you start out to just to pass the initial let's say the initial resistance that you can have
Mhm.
on the other side. Maybe
Sure.
something that you had to do too.
Yeah, and this is a sidebar, but I since Charles, you talked about just introducing people too. Let me send you someone after this who cold calls live on LinkedIn all the time, and he's amazing, and he is a scientist with this stuff. I'll send his info over to you. Kieran Paul is his name, just to give him a quick shout out. He's incredible. I aspire to be as scientific on cold calls as he is.
Oh wow.
And maybe that's a good sales conversation of when in doubt, break it down into a science. Okay, what do we need? What are we getting to? What's in the way? And follow those steps and try and work through those to give yourself more of a roadmap. But I digress. I'd love to, talk about this more with you anytime.
You
Yeah.
know, I'm a very visual guy. So when I'm kind of like mapping out your journey between Broadway and where you are now, and this talk about authenticity and discovery of things that are authentic inside of something that you would not consider to be of
Mhm.
interest to you. I see a lot of Venn diagrams, right? And I think there's this intersection of Ben's world and the world outside. And every so often it comes together and there's this little point. And for you, that's something like AI. You like it. You really understand. You like learning about it. Do you understand the super technical detail of how to change, something in the back end for the code? Maybe not, but you at least understand the use and the capability of it. And so that tiny sliver of intersection is what you call sales, is what you call authenticity. Because when you start learning about something and you start enjoying something, it becomes easier to sell because it's not selling. You're just talking about something cool that you like, that you enjoy.
That's right.
Um, there's a really funny uh, kind of science behind likability. And the only reason I know this is because for years, everyone thought I was kind of an asshole. And I'm like, well, how do I be less of an asshole?
That does
And
surprise me, honestly.
see, it's
Seriously, it's hard
working,
to
right?
imagine. It is working. Well done.
but but I looked into, okay, what makes people likable and approachable? And it turns out there was a study done by women rating the attractiveness of men. And one of the things that they looked into is, okay, well, what if this guy is just super passionate about, I don't know, pinball, just something off the wall that's not really incredibly, attractive as like a hobby, but he
Mhm.
really cares about it and he really likes it. And they put them in a room together and they just said, okay, all you need to do is listen to him rant about pinball for a half hour. And in cases where the person was talking about something that they actually cared about, the attractiveness score like doubled, tripled. And in cases where they were talking about something where they didn't know about it, but they were like reading off a sheet essentially, it flatlined. It just fell apart. And so I guess this is another long-winded way of saying that I think interest in something, especially when you're trying to sell or when you're trying to communicate or when you're trying to do anything in general, right? It can be something like a continuum. There doesn't have to be a definitive yes, I know everything about this subject and I'm really, really good at it. So it's really coming authentic to me. Uh, no, that's not where it needs to be. But the more you learn, the more you talk about something, the more you kind of ingrain it into your day-to-day life, um, the more you actually start authentically appreciating at the very least. Maybe you don't like it, but you can at least appreciate the work that goes behind it. And then other people start appreciating that as well. They're like, I never thought of that. Um, Fun fact, and no one knows this besides my wife, actually, but years and years ago, back when I just left high school, I started working at a Babies R Us. And I sold car seats and strollers. And so I had to learn everything about car seats and strollers. And I really appreciated some of the functions. And I started talking to, new moms and dads about all these things. And then now, whenever I see one going down the street, I can be like, "Oh yeah, that's the Graco Grayson
Oh, that's
that's
the
based off of."
XLR13.
Yeah, exactly. And my wife will look at me and she'll tell me, "Dude, it's been a decade since you've done that. Longer, if that." It's a little strange. We're not at kids yet, but then she laughs and everyone has a good laugh, thinking like, Charlie, the guy who knows about accounting, consulting, networking and stuff, he is judging my baby carriage. But
admiring the work of like, oh, well done. That's a good
yeah,
purchase.
yeah, exactly. Along those lines, there is something that Geoff and I are really passionate about, and it's part of why we started this podcast, right? We believe that people are super cool. They're incredible, and they do incredible things. And we wanted to kind of show the world these kinds of positions and people so that they can get inspired. But, inspiration only goes so far. What we really like to do is we like to make sure that everyone leaves listening to this pod. They stop listening and they leave with a skill, something that can help take them from either where they are right now to this same position of sales, or even if they don't want to go into sales but they recognize that it's really important, right? They can take a skill away to put into their own repertoire. So, Ben, what is one skill you would tell anyone to kind of get them that little plus one in their career?
Great question. Great question. I've gotten really far in life reading the room. And I'm giving a presentation next Thursday at a conference here. And the friend I was talking about speech things to this morning, I mentioned this to him too. Who's in the room? Who am I speaking to? And if it was all people my exact age, I would make niche jokes. If everyone was exactly my age, I would reference my so-called life on MTV. I would ask where you were when you learned about Kurt Cobain, things like that. Like people born in 1980. I would make 1980 born jokes. But the people in the room are ages like 25 to 65. So I think about these things. Read the room in a very healthy way, not like, bro, read the room, but actually who's in there? How will I reach these people best? And how do I get the message that remains the same from me across to them? Your authenticity and message remains the same no matter what, but I was in an elevator pre-COVID a couple of years ago, and I jumped in, and there was some joke that I walked into these two guys in their 80s were having. And it was something about taking the one train in New York City, taking the one train in New York. And something in my brain just spoke. And I turned to them and I wanted to know, we were going up to the top floor where there's stops in the middle. And something in my brain went, hey, am I on the local or the express elevator? And they bowled over laughing. And it was such a dumb joke. And you know when you say things out loud and you and your brain you go, what are you doing? Stop talking. But it's the right thing. And sometimes you say something and people laugh and you go, oh, I didn't even think it was that funny. Just read the room. Like I wouldn't have said that to 15-year-olds. Like I wouldn't talk to 15-year-olds in public, but like those are certain things you say to certain types of people in a way that they'll understand, or you can connect with them, most importantly. I think reading the room is about connecting with people in the way that you will reach them. You'll hear a lot in sales about find people where they are, meet people where they are, earn the right to speak to them. I love that. Leslie Bennett says this all the time, earn the right to speak to people. But I'm such a huge fan also of what is the best way that these folks are going to understand it, and frame the way you approach every room like that. If you're walking into a boardroom of people all sitting down in suits and formal wear and you are presenting something in a very starkly clean, pristine office, that's one thing. If you are presenting or doing stand-up comedy or something in a Lower East Side bar in the back of things and a band just finished up, that's another. That's an environment. So I'm walking into this conference on Thursday next week thinking, all right, I know the space. I've seen photos of the space. How's it going to feel speaking in there? And I've looked at some of the guest list. So I know my audience. So the one thing I would love to share with people is if it helps you, this is not a necessary thing ever, but it helps me of just read the room of who I'm speaking to, because I stay the same, but the way I communicate to them can change. Hope that makes
Wow.
sense.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Read the room, adapt to the people that you are talking to.
And not change you. Keep yourself the same, but the way you're reaching them, you can adjust that. The way we speak to people in our parents' generation differently than we speak to each other, differently, somebody on the street versus somebody in a bank versus somebody in a yoga studio, even. It's not a lot changing, but the environment changes. So you can kind of take that all in with you. And this is my theater training talking. Take the space in with you. The classic trope is use the space. But use the space means, is it a large room? Is it a small room? Are the ceilings high? Are the ceilings low? Are we in a little Zoom box? Are we sitting next to each other? And will our communication be different and best using the space we're in? That sums it up.
I have to
Yeah,
find
you
that
know, I'm
express
thinking that
elevator.
it's a good
You're
joke,
holding on to that
actually.
one. I saw it. You're waiting for that one, huh? Love it.
You know, we have different words for, we have hearing and we have listening. And in the same way, we can have talking, just making noise. And we have talking to the people who are there, talking directly to them, or as you said, reaching them where they are. That's a very powerful advice. Ben,
But it lands.
thank you very much. And now I would like to ask you a question that we ask all of our guests. I will give you the magic microphone. Magic microphone is magic because it allows you to speak for 2 minutes to absolutely everyone on Earth of today, as well as everyone from the future generations. I will now give you the mic. What would you want to say?
Interesting question. And just to repeat it, 2 minutes speaking to everyone who might listen in the world and also future generations. Was that right?
Yeah.
Great question. Great question. I'm going to touch on what you mentioned about being interesting in pinball. Have interests. Be excited about things. Have hobbies that don't make sense to anybody else. So long as they're harmless, they bring you joy. They don't bring you to financial ruin or anything else. They're not destructive physically, mentally. Have hobbies, have interests. You can live your whole life doing one thing. But coming from the theater, there's always a saying that living life is what makes you the best actor. You need to live your life and experience life to then inhabit people in that world. If you're only living within the walls of a rehearsal room, or say on Zoom, on sale in Salesforce and HubSpot and things like that in sales communities, going to mixers and talking about the same thing over and over, the variety being the spice of life will make you better at the thing you want to be better at. So have hobbies and interests and allow yourself to be passionate about things in life that might not contribute to your capitalistic idea of what it means to contribute. It'll make you better at what you want to do. It'll allow you to de-stress. It'll allow you to find friends. There's always the thing. If you are an adult and you want to find new friends, take a hobby on. Find a hobby. You will find other people that are interested in that thing, especially niche. The more niche, the better, because the more you can share about something with people and show your excitement, to your point, Charles, they will find you more interesting because you're thinking through these points. My Roman Empire, everyone has one. Yeah, the joke being, what is the thing you think about once a week that other people might not think about as much? My Roman Empire is, are you familiar with Norse mythology? The Einar, Thor, Odin, Freya, this whole lineup of Norse gods, using mythology as a term for other people's religion, in this case, a very Joseph Campbell way. We do not know anything about Norse mythology, about the Norse pantheon. We know a book written 300 years after it was practiced and journal accounts of people who did not like them. We know nothing. So Thor as a Marvel superhero, Loki as a Marvel anti-hero, let's say now he used to be villain, now anti-hero. We know nothing about what actually was practiced in this religion. But we as a culture have decided to take a book. Imagine if it was now and someone wrote a book about us 300 years from now. That's what it is. We know nothing about a world practice that we have accepted. And I guarantee you there are other examples of that phenomenon in life that you know about that I don't. And man, would I love to hear about it. No further.
Whoa. Ben, thank you very much. Thank you so much for your wisdom, for your energy, for this interesting conversation. It was really
Thank you.
great.
I appreciate your time. This is really fun. I appreciate you both doing this.
If you're listening to this, make sure to give us 5 stars if you like the episode. This helps us a lot to make the show more known. Make sure also to refer to your friends. Send the episode to everyone that you know. And thank you very much, guys.
Thank you so much. Appreciate your time, and any Broadway show recommendations you want, I'm your guy.
Interesting. All right. Thanks, everyone. Take care. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.